Hello, everyone. Are you curious about how the world is created? How about the stars, the moon, the sky? Well, did you know that in different parts of the world, there are different versions of the tale of creation?
That's right, Liz. In different parts of the world, people are brought up with different stories that create the culture they become familiar with. Do you know any creation stories, Kath?
Of course, these stories are part of what you call the pantheons of mythology, and it's distinct to the place of origin where people first came to believe.
These tales are part of mythological pantheons, collections of gods and lore. Today, we're exploring six iconic pantheons from Western and Southern Europe. So, sit back and relax as we're teleporting straight to the reels.
Game!
Game on! First, in the Southern Europe, the Spanish mythology. Spanish mythology is a blend of ancient culture, Celtic, Roman, Visigothic, and Moorish, all shaped by Christian faith and centuries of war. But unlike mythologies with elaborate creation stories of gods birthing the universe, the Spanish mythology is rooted in a biblical worldview. God is a creator, the world began with Adam and Eve. History unfolds through the divine will of the God where everything is happening under his plan. The mythological world of Spain, especially the story of El Cid, starts during the time when Spain was divided between Christian kingdoms and Muslim lands. The time period sets the stage for many heroic and legendary tales. Now let's take a look at the realms in the Spanish mythology. So in Spanish mythology, the stories happen in two main realms, the heavenly realm and the earthly realm. So the earthly realm consists of the real places in Spain, the Castile, Leon, Aragon, and the Al-Andalus. These is where the Christians and Muslims areas of Spain are during the Middle Ages, and we also have the spiritual realm. This includes the heaven and hell. People believe that how you lived your life, whether good or bad, would decide where your soul would go after your death. Now we have some of the main figures in the folklore El Cid. God, the main divine figure. And we also have Saint James or Santiago Matamoros, the patron saint of Spain. And we also have El Cid himself, or Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, a real man who became a legendary hero. He was a skilled warrior known for his bravery, loyalty, and wisdom. And also King Alfonso VI, a king who once trusted El Cid, then banished him, but then later on needed his help. And then Saint Lazarus. In one of the legends, he appears as a sick man, and after El Cid helps him, he rewards him with God's blessing. Now let's talk more about El Cid, the most famous hero in Spanish mythology. So Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, also called El Cid, lived in 11th century. He was a nobleman and a military leader. The Moors, who were Muslims from Spain and North Africa, gave him the name El Cid, which means the Lord, while Christians called him the Champions. El Cid first fought for King Sancho, helping him win battles. After Sancho died, his brother Alfonso VI became king. First, Alfonso allowed El Cid to stay in his court, but later banished him. So even in exile, El Cid didn't give up. He offered his service to the Muslim ruler of Zaragoza, fighting battles and building his reputation. So eventually, he captured the city of Valencia, where he ruled there peacefully until his last breath. So why was El Cid's story important to the Spanish mythology? Because he showed what it is to become a loyal person, not just a warrior. He became a symbol of what true hero should be. Because he was brave, he was loyal to the king and his family, and expressed kindness to both Christians and Muslims. So Spanish mythology may not be filled with gods like the other pantheons, but it's just as rich with stories of real people turned legendary, spiritual beliefs, and deep cultural values. Through the story of El Cid, we see how courage, faith, and kindness can shape a man into a hero, and a hero into a legend. First, let's begin with the creation stories, how the world of this pantheon came to be. So interestingly, Alpine mythology doesn't have a single unified origin myth. It spans in several countries, including Slovenia, Austria, Switzerland, and parts of Germany and Italy. However, two major traditions dominate, Slavic and the Norse. So in Slavic tradition, the world began in darkness, and with only rod and an egg containing Svarog. Once the egg hatched, the fragments of its shell created a sacred tree that divided the heavens, earth, and the sea. Svarog used divine power from the underworld to shape the sun, moon, animals, and even humans. This duality of light and dark, of creation and balance, is central to the myth. On the other hand, the Austrian version, influenced by the Norse mythology, tells of a great void called the Ginnungagap, flanked by the elemental realms of fire and ice. When these two forces met, they gave rise to Ymir, the first giant. After Ymir was slain by Odin and his brothers, his body became a foundation of the world, seas from his blood and earth from his flesh, thus and the sky from his skull. From logs, the gods created the first human, Ask and Embla, and placed them in Midgard, safely surrounded by a protective barrier. At the heart of the pantheon is Reisha, the mountain goddess, worshipped under various names such as the Nosaduna or the Matreya. She is a protector of animals, and she punishes those who hunt unjustly. In one story, she appears as Saint Margiata, who blesses Alpine's pastures until her trust is betrayed, highlighting themes of secrecy, guardianship, and divine consequences. Equally fascinating is Frau Percha, a fearsome yet revered crone. She roams the Alps during the 12th night of Christmas and rewards the good with silver coins and punishing the wicked in a gruesome ways. But despite her terrifying nature, she is still celebrated in Alpine's festivals. And then we also have Krampus, the dark companion of Saint Nicholas. Though not divine, he represents a punitive side of nature, punishing disobedient children during the Yuletide season. Now, let's have some of the major myths and stories passed down through the Alpine tradition. To begin with, the tale of Melusine, a woman cursed to become half serpent every Saturday, tells of love, secrecy, and betrayal. When her husband breaks his promise and spies on her, he calls her a serpent, and then she transforms into a dragon, leaving their home forever. Next is a much darker story, Dasun and Tunchi. Three lonely herdsmen create a doll for companionship, only to abuse it. Eventually, the doll comes to life, takes revenge, and leaves their skin hanging on the roof. It's a brutal reminder that violating nature has dire consequences. And finally, the terrifying spectacle of the wild hunt. A ghostly possession led by either Odin or a cursed nobleman, and is a reminder of those who witness it of their mortality. Accompanied by red-eyed dogs, it is said to be the moment where the veil between life and death grows thin. And lastly, let's take at some of the most notable alpine creatures. One of the most well-known is the Tatzelworm, a serpent-like creature with small cat-like legs. Some say it breathes fire, while others claim it emits poison gas. But either way, it serves as a warning to those who go wander too far from the mountain. Then there's the Alphix, dwarf-like spirits dressed in old miner clothes. And in one tale, a miner named Jacob or Jacob is shown hidden gold by an Alphix. When he became greedy and breaks his promise, the spirit punished him by sealing the mine forever. So Alpine mythology weaves together nature, morality, and the mystical, creating a rich and complex world filled with gods, monsters, spirits, and humans. From its hunting legend to its majestic deities, it continues to echo the values of balance, reverence, and consequence, reminding that in the mountains, the divine and the dangerous often walk side by side. Although resources about Alpine mythology are limited, the Celtic mythology has a surplus of sources. So next would be the Celtic mythology. So to begin, let me share how the Celtic world came to existence. So in the beginning, beneath the quiet sea, a melody known as Oran Mor, or the Great Melody, began to stir. This ancient sound spiraled through the ocean, growing in strength until it reached the shore. From the sea foam, a mystical mare named Iluchan emerged. She became the first divine being, and from an oak tree, she birthed the first god. Together, they created more deities. However, these gods grew lonely, so from the same oak tree, they crafted the first humans and animals. In another divine act, Ilucha threw the tree into the water, giving rise to the giants from its bark. And the heavens. The Celtic envisioned a universe made up of three realms: the sky above, the earth in the middle, and the sea below. And at the heart of this cosmic order are the Tuatha De Danann, or the folk of the goddess Danu. These divine beings settled in Ireland became gods, fairy folk, and noble rulers. And according to the traditions, humans are their descendants, highlighting the Celts' beliefs in divine ancestry and the closeness between mortals and immortals. Now, turning to the deities and heroic figures, let's meet some of the most powerful and beloved beings in Celtic lores. First and foremost is Danu, the mother goddess. She is the root of divine power, nurturing gods and blessing Ireland itself. Through her, kings and nobles are granted strength and wisdom. Following Danu, we have Dagda, the chieftain of Tuatha De Danann. He is the god of life and death, seasons, magic, and agriculture. So he has numerous lovers and many children. Among those children is Agnus. He is the god of love and poetry, known for his beauty and charm, and is also a skilled magician and shape shifter. So Celtic mythology offers some of the most memorable tales in all folklore. To start with, we have the children of Lir. So in the story, 4 children are turned into swans by their jealous stepmother and are condemned to live as birds for 900 years, so wandering from lake to sea to island. After centuries, they are finally transformed back into humans at the sound of church bells, only to pass away shortly after. So equally tragic is the story of Deirdre of the Sorrows. Deirdre falls in love with Nawes, a noble knight, despite being promised to the king. So the lovers flee to Scotland, but they are eventually found. So Nawes is killed and Deirdre, overcome with grief, takes her own life. Now let's have the notable creatures of the Celtic mythology. Among the most iconic is the Banshee. She is not a human, but a spirit, cloaked in a dark attire, who mourns the coming of death of someone in the household. Her cry is chilling, a supernatural signal that death is near. Equally fascinating is the Silky. So these are the sea-dwelling beings that resemble seals in the water, but shed their skins to become enchanting human on land, though they are not as irresistibly beautiful as the mermaids and sirens, but they are not malicious. Unlike the mermaids, Silkies do not seek harm, but rather to return to the sea when their skin is recovered. So Celtic mythology weaves together the forces of nature, music, love, and sorrows, with a pantheon of gods who are as emotional and as complex as the human they created. So from the melodic birth of the world through Oran Mor to the heartbreak of swans and star-crossed lovers and the whispers of banshees in the night, the Celtic stories reminds us of the magic in the natural world and the power of the emotions in myth.
Greatly influenced by Celtic mythology, Welsh mythology takes their creation stories from various sources, including the majority being from the Celts. Welsh mythology believes in the physical world and the other world, with the one believing in death while the other world believes in rebirth. They believe in the god of the other world named Arwan and Rhiannon, the goddess associated with horses, the moon, and the other world, known for her independence and her strength. In their major story, the Four Branches of Mabinongi describes the story of Branwen, a princess caught up in a war involving both Britain and Ireland, and also the story of Pwyll, the prince of Dyfed, who exchanges places with Arwen, the ruler of the other world. Some creatures involved in Welsh mythology includes a dog that could bring death called Sin Anwyn, and a sea monster named Afranc. In the land of leprechauns and pots of gold, Ireland has a creation story that is linked with the Bible. The first immigrants being led by Suzair, the granddaughter of Noah, seeking refuge from the biblical flood, but unfortunately, despite their best efforts of survival, the Great Flood eventually swamped them, leaving just Fintain de Bocra surviving. Fintain was granted supernatural immortality and shape-shifting abilities, and he became a living witness to Ireland's history, transforming into a salmon, then an eagle, and eventually a hawk over the course of 5,000 years. The Irish mythological pantheon represents a universe that is complicated, flexible, and connected, with the human world and the supernatural being not absolutely separated but is always intersecting. At the center of it is Bith, the physical world full of humans like you and me, which coexists with the other world, a parallel realm that is populated by gods, spirits, and supernatural entities. They have similar gods in Celtic mythology, but one goddess in particular is particular to Ireland, and her name is Bridget. She is the goddess of poetry, healing, and smithcraft, and is frequently worshipped in three forms, embodying the duties of nurturer, protector, and inventor. There are other gods and goddesses like Aini and Neimon. The most well-known warrior in Ireland is Shu Chointyne, also known as the Hound of Ulster. In the Tyne Bull Cloage, armed with a sacred with a rice shard, a war frenzy that turns him into a monstrous power, he defends Ulster by himself using unbeatable odds. The second battle of Magtroy is an epic battle that shows Tuatha De Dannan's desperate struggles against the Fomorians. It is a strong story of resistance, solidarity, and triumph of skill and courage over raw force. Another major story is about the Lavender Lady, where legend has it, in a castle in Pembrokeshire, where a spirit of a lady is supposed to have spread the scent of lavender as she passes through the palace grounds. One of the most well-known and mysterious creatures of Irish mythology, the Puka, is a shapeshifter who may take form of a dog, horse, goat, and even a human with animal abilities. Because of its unpredictable characteristic, which allows it to either bring good fortune or play terrible tricks on naive people. It is both feared and respected by the Irish. Next up, let's talk about French mythology. In French mythology, the Song of Roland follows Roland, whose judgment is clouded by personal preoccupation of renown. He rejects Oliver's advice to blow his horn and summon help from Charlemagne. On Roland's refusal, the hopeless battle is joined, and the flower of Frankish knighthood is reduced to a handful of men. The horn is finally sounded, too late to save Oliver, Turpin, or Roland, who has been struck in error by the blinded Oliver, but in time for Charlemagne to avenge his heroic vassals. Returning to France, the emperor breaks the news to Aude, Roland's betrothed and the sister of Oliver, who falls dead at his feet. The poem ends with the trial and execution of Galenon. The three worlds connected with the song with French mythology, particularly in the Song of Roland, are almost identified by the Christian universe, which include heaven, where God and angels rule the war and grant martyrs like Roland eternal glory, and on earth, Charlemagne fought a holy war against the Saracens, disguised as an effort to convert pagans, and hell, which is implied to be waiting for traitors like Galenon, whose souls will suffer from eternal damnation. Charlemagne was the king of the Franks and a committed militant Christian, and a loyal ally of the Pope and a great emperor. He forced conversion as he expanded the boundaries of his empire outward of his central territory, straddling present-day France and Germany. In Galenon's treachery and peace talks, Galenon seeks revenge on Roland, leading up to a surprise Saracen attack. Roland's pride prevents him from summoning help. Ultimately, he and his forces perish, prompting Charlemagne's vengeance. The Saracens are depicted as pagans and infidels, often described with monstrous traits to emphasize their otherness and their threat to Christendom. For instance, the Saracen king Belligent is portrayed as a giant, embodying the physical and moral enormity of the enemy. The poem also personifies evil as a spiritual force aligned with the Saracens, framing their actions as demonic and their defeat as divine victory. Some other minor characters involved in the Song of Roland include Pinabel, Nimes, Ogre, and Aude, the beloved and betrothed of Roland, who is also the sister to Oliver.
Now, let's dive into British Isles mythology. The mythology of the British Isles blends Celtic, Irish Gaelic, Germanic, and Anglo-Saxon traditions, each contributing distinct creation stories shaped by nature, divine conflicts, and human struggles. The British Isles doesn't have a single creation story. First, Celtic mythology dominated the land, and after the Roman Empire's invasion, Christian leaders sought to assimilate Celtic people. Roman culture thus had a profound and lasting impact on the people both in and outside of the British Isles. and this led to the new creation and influence of the Germanic and Anglo-Saxon mythology. One creation story claims that by 500 CE, the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes drove the Celts to Wales, Scotland, Cornwall, Ireland, Brittany, bringing Norse gods, myths, and religious practices that conflicted with existing British belief system. The mythological cosmos of British Isles reflects a layered, symbolic universe shaped by Celtic, Anglo-Saxon, and other regional traditions. Interconnected realms like Otherworld and Underworld define settings. Dimensions vary. Celtic cosmologies emphasize fluid boundaries between worlds, while Anglo-Saxon traditions aligned with the Norse-inspired structures, such as the Nine Worlds linked by Yggdrasil, the World Tree. Sections of the Pantheon's world include Asgard for gods, Midgard for humans, and Hel for dead. Regional myths also feature fairy realms, sacred sites, and nature-based deities tied to elements like rivers or forests. Unlike rigid hierarchies in Greek cosmology, this system blends physical and spiritual planes, emphasizing cyclical connections between life, death, and rebirth. The British Isles also believe in Celtic and Gaelic gods like Dagda and Tuatha Dé Danann, and as well as the Germanic and Anglo-Saxon gods like Odin, the All-Father, who sacrifices an eye for wisdom and command warriors in Valhalla. Thor, the thunder god, wielding Mimir to battle giants, and Tyr, the god of justice and her glory, whose hand was sacrificed to bind the wolf Fenrir. Here are the lists of the other deities, god and goddesses present in British Isles mythology. One of the major myths and stories in the British Isles is the story of Beowulf. Beowulf is one of the most popular stories of the British Isles. It is about the Scandinavian man who battles monsters and dragons. The Celtic tale of Cuchulainn recounts the warrior's transformation into the Hound of Colin through a magical ritual, followed by his tragic battles and eventual death, is one also of the creation stories or major myths. Origin myths often involve cosmic battles, such as the Finian cycle, where Fionn Mac Cumhaill gains wisdom through the salmon of knowledge. When Finn was just a boy, he had to leave his home and live with a wise man, Nyagas, who was to be his tutor. One of the major myths as well is the destruction of the Annis, a catastrophic event in Irish mythology linked to the Milesian invasion. The British Isles as well has plenty of notable characters or creatures like Morrigan, an Irish goddess of fate and war, the Selkies, the Banshee, fairy dogs called Tywin Theg. Here are the other lists of notable creatures present in British Isles mythology. Each of the groups who came to Britain brought it with the legends of heroes and myths of gods, rites of sacrifice, and other religious practices, belief systems particular to each culture, place, and era of origin. With each succeeding wave of invasion, new mythic system came into contact and conflict with the older systems already established in Britain. Next, we have the Arthurian mythological pantheon. According to the history of the kings of Britain, Ambrosius was a British king and uncle to Arthur who took over from Vortigern after his death. Ambrosius' reign was relatively short, but he is said to have made significant contributions to the kingdom during his time as a ruler. After his death, Ambrosius was buried at the famous monument of Stonehenge, which Merlin apparently arranged. Theodore Pendragon and Igraine. According to the French Vulgate, Theodore Pendragon becomes king after the death of his brother Ambrosius. During his reign, Uther falls in love with Igraine, the wife of Gorlius, Duke of Cornwall. The tale of Uther and Igraine is a key event in the Arthurian legend, as their union ultimately leads to the birth of King Arthur, the hero of the story. Arthur, born to Uther and Igraine, is raised in secret by Merlin after Uther's death. King Vortigern invites the Saxons to Britain, who instead turn to raiding. Uther rises to kingship, seduces Gerna, and begets Arthur. Young Arthur defeats the Saxons, Picts, Scots, and Irish, marrying Guinevere and establishing knighthood, leading to cultural prosperity. He conquers Gaul but faces revolt from nephew Mordred during his absence. Arthur returns to defeat Mordred but is mortally wounded and taken to Avalon for healing. The cosmic dimension and setting of Arthurian. Camelot is the castle and court associated with the legendary King Arthur. Absent in the early Arthurian material, Camelot first appeared in 12th century French romances and since the Lancelot Grail cycle, eventually came to be described as the fantastic capital of Arthur's realm and a symbol of the Arthurian world. Camelot epitomizes earthly order and chivalry, contrasting with the chaotic wasteland, and Avalon exists as a transformative bridge to the divine. The other world, accessible through mystical trials or enchanted objects, embodies spiritual renewal and cosmic balance, governed by entities like the Lady of the Lake and Morgan Le Fay, whose magic straddles creation and chaos. King Arthur is the central figure in the Arthurian legend, known for his bravery, wisdom, and leadership. Other characters in Arthurian legend include Merlin, Guinevere, Lancelot the Luck, and Mordred, and of course, his knights in the Round Table. We have Sir Lancelot, Sir Gawain, Sir Galahad, Sir Percival, Sir Bors, Sir Kay, Sir Geraint, Sir Gareth, Sir Lamorak, Sir Tristan or Sir Tristram, Gamarus, and Mordred. Here are the other lists of figures or heroic figures present in Arthurian mythology. The most famous tale from Arthurian mythology has to be about the Excalibur. The Lady of the Lake presents Arthur with a sword after Merlin had brought him to her. It is the powerful and enchanted weapon associated with King Arthur's reign. Other stories, quests, and adventures include Tristan and Isolde, the quest for the Holy Grail, the Knight of the Cart, the betrayal of Lancelot and Guinevere, and the death of King Arthur. And the notable creatures in Arthurian mythology include the Green Knight, Oriana, Red Knight, Tumtum, Fish Knight, Dunstallion, Demogorgon, Lamray, and many more. Here's are the other lists. A creation story in a poem by Desgrands about Albena, a daughter of great king. He writes that Albena and her sisters had been banished for plotting to end their husbands. They arrived in inhabited lands with Albena had named Albion. The sister became involved with the incubi, a group of monsters that violate women and impregnate them, making them give birth to hideous giants who became the first inhabitants. A descendant of Aeneas, Brutus of Troy, after having been exiled from his home, found the island inhabited by giants who and his men had ended, claiming the land as their own and naming it. Irish and British myths are usually linked to the ancient places dotted all over the continent of Europe. The British and Irish myths were often set in familiar landscape of the British Isles long before the age of science. British mythology, primarily Celtic, Anglo-Saxon traditions, features a multi-layered cosmos intertwined with supernatural realms. Their major gods and heroes are completely familiar from Arthurian and British Isles. Key deities are Brigitte from Poetry Forge, Bran the Blessed, Guardian of Britain, and Herne the Hunter, Wilderness Spirit. So, English or British English mythology have major myths or stories. First, we have the Herne the Hunter. Legend goes that Herne the Hunter was one that kept the Windsor forest during the days of Queen Elizabeth I. And when he committed some sort of great offense, he hung himself in order to avoid facing shame. Next story is the Jack o' Kent. One legend tells how Jack o' Kent made a deal with the devil to help build a bridge, but the devil would earn the first soul that crossed it. And another story is the Church Grim, being that may be borrowed from Scandinavian folklore. The Church Grim is supposed to be an ancient soul that, as the name implies, guards churches. The notable creatures of British English mythological pantheon, we have the fiery dog, Alpha Lorca. The Alpha Lorca is a nasty little creature of Irish tales that is classified in Celtic folklore as a joint eater. And the Ardú, vampires that have fallen from grace in the 21st century. But luckily, there are many countries with their own brand of vampires. So, that's it for British English Mythological Pantheon. Hope that you learned something out from our discussion. Back to you!